Well, hello, Desert Hills family. I'm excited to be with you again and to share our church's book of the month for April, which happens to be Christ Alone by Dr. Stephen Wellum, who happens to be a professor of theology at Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. And this book is part of what's called the Five Solas Series, referring to those five solas or those five foundational principles of the Reformation. So you might recall that last time I was with you, I talked about another book that's in this Five Solas series, a book called Faith Alone by Tom Schreiner, that idea of sola fide, faith alone. And today, of course, we look at Christ alone, or sola Christus, another foundational principle. And I hope that in the not-so-distant future, I'll be able to read the other three books in this series. So what Stephen Wellum does, he divides this book, Christ Alone, into three parts, basically. Part one is what he calls Christ Alone, the exclusivity of his identity. Then we come to part two, which is Christ Alone, the sufficiency of his work. And then there's part three, Christ Alone, in the Reformation and today. And throughout these three parts, what Wellum does, he emphasizes such things as the necessity of Christ and exclusively Christ alone for our salvation. And he emphasizes that this was the plan of God from the very beginning. And he then explores how Christ fulfills what are sometimes referred to as the types and shadows in the Old Testament, making it clear that Christ is a culmination of God's plan throughout redemptive history. So in other words, to kind of put the cookies on the lower shelf, even the Old Testament points to Christ. Wellum then gets into some other deeper theological points about such things like the person of Christ, that he is fully God, and that he is fully man, and its significance for our salvation. So in other words, he makes the case why it was necessary for someone who is both divine and also fully human to mediate between God and humanity for our salvation. He, of course, dives more into the work of Christ, Christ's sacrifice on the cross to satisfy God's justice, and also to display his mercy. And I appreciate how Dr. Wellum, on the one hand, goes deep into those theological points, as is necessary, but he also provides a lot of practical things, too. He addresses contemporary challenges to this idea of Christ alone, things like pluralism, things like inclusivism, a word we tend to hear a lot these days. And what he does, he confronts those things with a very strong biblical case for the uniqueness of Christ. And then later on, Wellum lays out how this doctrine of Christ alone, this truth of the exclusivity of Christ, should thus drive how we proclaim the gospel. It should really spark in us a desire to share the gospel. I've got to tell you, I've really learned to appreciate the works of Dr. Stephen Wellum. He does things in a very deep manner, very thoughtful manner. He does a great job of uniting deep theology with practical implications. So whether you're new to these concepts or whether you've studied them for years, I think this book will strengthen your understanding of why Jesus is the only mediator between God and man. So don't just take my word for it. Grab a copy of this book. We'll have one in our library, which is, of course, now upstairs in room 202 of the two-story family building. And I would say take this opportunity to love the Lord with your heart, with your mind, as you are encouraged by the sufficiency of Christ, the beauty of Christ in the pages of this book, Christ Alone by Dr. Stephen Wellum.